It is the 20th of October, 1909, in Eastridge, Tennessee, right at the dusty border of Georgia. A highly trained team of federal agents is positioned along a quiet road, holding their breath as they wait for a very specific target. Their mission is not to bust a notorious gang of bootleggers or a heavily armed cartel, but to intercept a simple delivery truck carrying highly dangerous goods. When the vehicle finally crosses the state line, they swarm it and stop the suspicious truck dead in its tracks. Without a single moment of hesitation, the agents confiscate the entire payload, 60 massive barrels of Coca-Cola syrup. The US government claimed the contents were dangerously adulterated with an addictive and harmful substance, which sounds completely insane today, but that terrifying substance was caffeine. Fast forward over a century later, and the global landscape looks pretty different. Today, we have Starbucks on practically every corner, Monster Energy glowing in every single gas station fridge, Mountain Dew flowing like tap water, and over-the-counter pills for the truly desperate. At least 80% of the world's entire population regularly consumes caffeine. You probably have a healthy dose of it circulating in your bloodstream right this second. Maybe you are lying in bed, staring at the ceiling at 2 in the morning, completely unable to fall asleep, and that is exactly why you clicked on this audio. But before we dive into the greatest corporate biological hijack in human history, do me a quick favor. If you want to survive the modern food industry without losing your mind, hit that subscribe button right now. We are decoding the invisible matrix of your local grocery store every single week, and you really do not want to miss what we are exposing next. One prominent scientist has literally called our modern caffeine consumption one of the longest, largest, unsupervised drug studies ever conducted on the human race. And the crazy part is how weird caffeine actually is when you look at it in nature. Plants originally developed caffeine as a toxic biological weapon to protect themselves from hungry predators. You can naturally find it in coffee beans, cacao beans, and tea leaves. In its purest, isolated form, it is a white powder that tastes bitterly soapy and deeply unpleasant. A 1/16 of a teaspoon will properly wake you up and get you ready for work. A 1/4 of a teaspoon will make your heart race, cause severe sweating, and trigger a wave of anxiety. And a full tablespoon would just straight up kill you before you even reached the office. But humanity did not always run on this magical white powder. If you go back to Europe in the Middle Ages, the daily routine was basically just a mild, continuous state of intoxication. People would have a hearty beer soup for breakfast, a solid glass of beer for lunch, and of course more beer for dinner. The average British citizen drank 3 liters a day, and yes, that actually included the children. They drank it not necessarily because they wanted to be drunk all the time, as the alcohol content was quite low, but mostly because it tasted significantly better than the disease-ridden local water. Then, in the 16th century, a hot, pitch-black drink from the Middle East arrived and completely short-circuited the European brain. It looked different than beer, it tasted different than beer, and most importantly, it had a drastically different physiological effect. Suddenly, coffee drinkers were seen as highly productive, sharp, and bourgeois, while the old traditional beer drinkers were suddenly labeled as lazy and overly comfortable. By the year 1700, London boasted 3,000 thriving coffee houses, which basically served as the original internet forums for society. Trade, literature, science, and philosophy exploded in these caffeinated rooms. Some historians even argue that the Age of Enlightenment and the entire Industrial Revolution would have been physically impossible without coffee. But the kings and rulers of the era absolutely hated it. King Charles II was absolutely terrified that his subjects were plotting a complex political coup while hopelessly hooked on coffee, so he outright banned all coffee houses. The public outcry was so massive and instantaneous that he was forced to humiliate himself and revoke the ban just a few days later. Over in Prussia, Frederick the Great took it a step further and banned coffee roasters entirely. To fight the massive black market that immediately popped up, the Prussian king actually hired 400 government officials known as coffee sniffers just to walk around the streets and track down illegal roasters by their scent. The ban was lifted immediately after his death, proving one historical constant: no caffeine ban in human history has ever been successful in the long run. And the world's largest beverage manufacturer made absolutely sure it stayed that way for good. Coca-Cola was originally invented by a pharmacist named John Pemberton and was aggressively advertised to the public as a legitimate medicine. It was claimed to miraculously cure headaches, hysteria, and melancholy. But the real reason it sold like crazy and built an empire was that it woke you up, mostly because the original recipe contained actual cocaine and a massive dose of caffeine. Eventually, due to public pressure, they were forced to remove the cocaine, but they kept the caffeine and they kept plenty of it. In the early 20th century, a standard everyday Coke had as much caffeine as today's extreme energy drinks. This brings us right back to our friend from the 1909 FBI raid, Harvey Washington Wiley. He was the head of the Bureau of Chemistry, the predecessor to today's powerful Food and Drug Administration, and he was absolutely disgusted that children as young as 4 years old were casually chugging cola. He firmly believed caffeine was a narcotic just as addictive as opium, which led to the famous government seizure of the Coca-Cola syrup shipment. The resulting spectacular court case was basically the Super Bowl of the early 1900s. The soon-to-be most powerful government in the world went head-to-head against the soon-to-be largest beverage manufacturer on Earth. Wiley and his office brought in over 20 expert witnesses, including doctors and scientists, confidently declaring in their closing statements that caffeine was a dangerous, potentially poisonous drug. Coca-Cola, realizing their entire financial empire was on the line, went into a corporate panic. Since there were virtually no human studies on caffeine at the time, they threw a mountain of cash at a young psychologist and told him to run a number of human experiments in just a few weeks. The young scientist, heavily funded by the corporation, delivered the exact exonerating results they paid for. His official conclusion in federal court was that caffeine was completely harmless, and even better, that it actually possessed a physical and mental performance-enhancing effect. Jackpot. Coca-Cola won, even though they later settled out of court and quietly agreed to slightly reduce the caffeine content. The public relations victory was permanent. The American public walked away firmly believing caffeine was a flawless wonder drug with zero side effects. And so began a long century of unrestrained, hypercharged consumption. In the US, black filter coffee and caffeinated soft drinks ruled the market for decades. Then, in the 1990s, Starbucks weaponized the concept entirely. Their brilliant recipe for success was using a roast that made the coffee taste significantly less bitter, and then flooding it with sugar, heavy cream, and massive portion sizes packing an absurd amount of caffeine. And just when we thought human biology could not physically handle any more stimulation, the year 1987 gave us the very first Red Bull can. 10 years later, the global market was flooded with countless suppliers trying to outdo each other, eventually pumping out massive 700-milliliter cans of liquid adrenaline. Now it is the modern day. Caffeine is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and it is literally everywhere. But here is the ultimate corporate magic trick. Caffeine is just the getaway driver, the real bank robber. The payload actually destroying our biology from the inside out is added sugar. Let us talk about the maximum amount of added sugar you are supposedly allowed to consume every single day. Most of us are doubling or tripling this limit without even realizing it, which over a week leads to a huge dangerous excess. And it is not just coming from the obvious culprits like candy bars, sweets, or fizzy sodas. Sugar hides in plain sight, masquerading in foods that are actively marketed to you as healthy and organic. You think you are making a smart adult choice with a bowl of granola? That is 4 teaspoons of sugar right there. A fresh glass of morning juice? 4 or more teaspoons. A healthy snack bar? 3 teaspoons. That fancy iced caramel coffee you grab on the way to work? 6 teaspoons. And a standard energy drink? 10 teaspoons of added sugar. But the undisputed king of biological sabotage is still the original sugar-sweetened beverage. A standard 500 milliliter Coke contains an eye-watering 12 teaspoons of sugar, and it hides in places you would never expect. Salad dressings, marinades, savory sauces, and pre-made soups all typically have added sugars. Manufacturers are essentially running a shell game. They will hide sugar on the ingredient list under dozens of fake names like syrups, agave, and concentrates. Newsflash, it is all just sugar. Add in the refined carbs from white wraps, white pasta, and white rice, which break down into simple sugars in your bloodstream just as easily, and you are trapped in a metabolic nightmare. By lunchtime, if you have any combination of these everyday items, you have likely smashed through your daily maximum of 6 teaspoons of added sugar without eating a single actual dessert. But here is the critical distinction you need to understand. Not all sugar operates as a biological weapon. Take a whole apple, for example. Yes, it contains natural sugar, but it comes wrapped in its own protective packaging of fiber and complex antioxidants. When you eat it in its natural structure, pectin is released, forming a thick gel-like layer inside your intestines. This mechanically slows the absorption of sugar into your body, giving you a steady release of energy and making you feel fuller for much longer. The same applies to whole grains, sweet potatoes, and lentils. These are packed with protective fiber and linked to better health. But when you drink commercial fruit juice, you are drinking a manufactured lie. The juice has been completely stripped of its natural fiber, meaning the sugar is super concentrated and readily absorbable by your system. A single glass of juice has the exact equivalent of 3 to 4 whole pieces of fruit inside it. Eating 4 apples would take you at least 15 minutes of chewing and leave you stuffed. Chugging that juice takes 10 seconds. Even though the sugar molecule is identical, the form in which it enters your body dictates whether it nourishes you or destroys your metabolic health. Right now, I want you to drop a comment below. What is the most absurdly sugary food you used to eat every single day, genuinely believing it was a healthy choice because of good marketing? Confess your nutritional sins in the comments. I want to read them and see who got scammed the hardest. So why do these massive corporations pump so much sugar into everything they make? Because they know your body is being chemically manipulated by the caffeine they strategically paired it with. In a brilliant scientific experiment, researchers gave subjects 2 versions of a new soft drink flavor, one with caffeine, one completely without. The subjects did not know which was which, but the caffeinated one was the overwhelming, clear favorite. The caffeine level was so incredibly low that they could not consciously detect it, but it still gave a subtle biological boost that made them feel good. Your body loves that subtle boost so much that it unconsciously favors almost anything with added caffeine. In another wild experiment, participants actually preferred caffeinated yogurt over regular decaf yogurt simply because their brains associated the flavor with the drug's subtle hit. That little psychological addiction pays off massively for the industry. 8 of the 10 most popular soft drinks in the US have added caffeine, solely because it unconsciously leads people to consume more of their highly unhealthy liquid sugar. Coca-Cola still aggressively claims they only need caffeine for the bitter flavor profile of their drink, but scientific blind taste tests prove the vast majority of people cannot even taste the caffeine in Coca-Cola. They use it because it makes you dependent, and their own corporate scientists know exactly what they are doing. This chemical dependency creates a brutal, never-ending vicious cycle. Caffeine works by blocking the absorption of a vital neurotransmitter called adenosine. Adenosine is the chemical that naturally builds up in your brain throughout the day to tell you that you are tired. When you consume caffeine, that vital message gets blocked. Your physical body desperately wants to rest, but your brain feels artificially awake, and this chemical blockade lasts far longer than you probably think. About 5 hours after a standard cup of coffee, half of the caffeine you consumed is still floating in your system. After 12 hours, a quarter of the dose is still actively lingering. If you drink a massive latte at 2 in the afternoon, you still have the equivalent of half a can of Red Bull actively keeping you awake at 2 in the morning. Caffeine makes you fall asleep later, wakes you up earlier, and destroys your deep sleep, which is the most critical phase for physical recovery and restoration. So you wake up completely exhausted, despite being in bed for a solid 8 hours. And what do you do to fix this morning exhaustion? You drink more coffee. Coffee is literally the solution to the exact sleep deficit problem it created. Temporary withdrawal from this cycle brings headaches, tiredness, mood swings, and concentration difficulties that can last up to a week. In fact, caffeine withdrawal was actually included as a mental disorder in the Diagnostic Manual of American Psychiatrists. Meanwhile, this chronic sleep deprivation and daily sugar flooding causes severe long-term damage. We are talking about rising rates of fatty liver disease, heart disease, obesity, type 2 diabetes, and even severe cognitive decline like dementia. The sugar disrupts your gut microbes, increases inflammation in your bloodstream, and pushes your liver to store dangerous fat. The youth are taking the heaviest hit. In the US, 1 in 3 teenagers heavily consumes energy drinks, getting hit with roughly 3 times the caffeine of a Coke and the same massive dose of sugar. Minors tolerate caffeine much worse than adults, and long-term energy drink consumption is now linked to severe cardiovascular problems among children and adolescents. But consumer advocates demanding stricter rules face a wall of money. The multi-million-dollar lobbying efforts of groups like the American Beverage Association, founded in 1919 and backed by Coca-Cola and Pepsi, fund friendly scientists and fight tooth and nail against regulating energy drinks for kids. So how do you escape this corporate doom loop? You do not have to move to the woods and cut out sugar completely. You just need to outsmart them with a few simple strategic steps. Step 1. Fix your morning routine. Breakfast is where a massive amount of hidden sugar sneaks in. Cereal, jam, and toast put you on a violent sugar roller coaster. You get a massive rush into your bloodstream, followed by a crippling dip, and in that dip, you fiercely crave even more sugar. Instead, build your breakfast around solid protein and fiber. Think eggs, beans, or even leftovers from dinner. If you want something sweet, make a yogurt bowl with hemp seeds, nuts, and berries. Let the fruit and spices like cinnamon bring the sweetness naturally. Step 2. Stop drinking liquid candy. Drinks are the biggest sugar trap because liquids do not register in your body the same way food does. They are not satiating and do not make you feel full. Swap the bottled smoothies, commercial juices, and sweetened iced coffees for water, homemade iced tea, or hibiscus tea leaves, which have a natural tart sweetness. And whatever you do, do not fall for the diet soda trap. Artificially sweetened drinks might disrupt your gut microbes and keep your psychological craving for sweetness alive without satisfying it. Think of them as a temporary stepping stone, not a permanent long-term solution. Step 3. Interrogate your cravings like a detective. Next time you desperately want sugar, pause and ask yourself a few questions. Are you actually hungry? If so, eat a handful of nuts or Greek yogurt for protein first. Are you just thirsty? Drink a massive glass of water or herbal tea because dehydration often masquerades as a sugar craving. Or are you tired and stressed, looking for emotional comfort? Because if you are just stressed, sugar is a terrible therapist. Go for a quick walk, stretch, or call a friend to get that dopamine hit instead. Finally, step 4. Win the war at the grocery store, not in your kitchen. Most sugar decisions happen in the aisles. If it is in your house, you are going to eat it. Check the labels before you buy and scan for those hidden syrup and concentrate names. Aim for products with 5 grams of sugar or less per 100 grams to stay in the safe zone. Build your meals around a clear source of protein like tofu, fish, or chicken. Add plant proteins like lentils, and finish with fibrous greens. This protein foundation is the absolute key to cutting long-term cravings. Caffeine transformed a historical society of heavy drinkers into a society of wakeful, hyper-productive workers. We live in a fast-paced, performance-obsessed culture where a drug that makes us artificially productive in 5 minutes feels like an absolute miracle. But it is a miracle that massive international corporations are using to slowly poison us, masking liquid sugar with a highly addictive chemical. The subtle undertone of this industry is that you never need to rest, just have another coffee. But it is more important than ever to step off the roller coaster, listen to the fatigue of your own body, and stop letting a corporate boardroom dictate what goes into your blood. If this audio completely ruined your favorite breakfast, then my job here is absolutely done. Smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments if you are going to try cutting out liquid sugar this week. Stay sharp, and I will see you in the next one.